Hi everybody, welcome back to Bentley House. Today we are continuing to work on our Addams family members. Now I've already made Uncle Fester and Lurch, and I'm kind of going in opposite order of my favorite characters, so by the time I get to my favorites, my doll making skills have improved as much as they're going to. So today I'm going to be working on Pugsley. Now I've already made a Pugsley, and you may have remembered him from my fail video. He's not a complete fail. I think if someone saw him you'd probably recognize who he is, but his hands kind of look like paws and they're backwards. He's a little bit on the large side. His head is really wide. Of course, I hand sculpted him, which is a whole different skill level. And for today I'm going to be using a kit that I purchased from a doll maker who actually casts the forms. So it's a little bit different. I think probably I would still end up with something similar to this if I was still trying to sculpt it by hand. But I decided to go ahead and remake Pugsley. I want all my dolls to look very like they came from the same hand. So here's the kit base that I'm using. It's a little boy, and he does already have paint on his face, so I'm gonna have to repaint over that. He's got freckles and eyelashes, and he's a really cute little boy, but I have to make him look like an Addams. So you can see the difference in scale here, obviously. The face is much narrower, and just the body in general is just gonna be a lot smaller. And here you can see the details on the face. It was already pre-painted by Sandra Stacy, and again I will leave the link to her website below. She's the person who I'm using all the doll kits from, and she's been so helpful in any questions I've had along the way. So here we go. We're going to work on Pugsley, and in all my videos I put the doll together using her instructions, and I don't really show that because if you get a doll kit from another artist, I want you to use their instructions for putting their doll together. And he ended up being, I think, what did I count there, like 4 inches or 4.5 inches tall. And I did notice that one arm is a little shorter than the other one, so when I do his clothing I'm going to have to keep that in mind. And real quickly I decided to make my own little miniature ironing board. I was using just like a pile of t-shirt material to iron on top of because the iron gets so hot it will melt my board. So I just took a piece of wood and then wrapped some t-shirt cloth over some batting and made my own little ironing board. So I wanted to show you that because I know I'll get some questions of what are you ironing on top of. Now luckily I still had the fabric that I used on my original Pugsley, so I'm going to need that. I'm going to need tacky glue, and I'm going to be using my clover iron, which you will see in a few minutes. And I'm going to be using this pant leg pattern. This is kind of the same basic shape I've been using for Lurch and Fester, so I'm not going to show you how I put it together. I explained it really clearly, I think, in you can let me know if not, in the videos for Lurch and Pugsley, or Lurch and Fester, so I'm not going to explain it here, but all I did was make the pants a little bit smaller and a little bit shorter so they come off as shorts. So it's a pretty easy pattern to follow, and I've been very successful with it, so I'm very happy with this, and I'll probably continue using it. So I typically have to remake the pants a couple times, but these actually fit really well. They were fairly snug, which I wanted them to be snug, especially in a doll this small. If I get things too big, it will start to add a lot of bulk to the doll and start to look even more unrealistic. So the snug fit was perfect. So now I'm going to be working on the shirt. I'm going to be a little bit more detailed on how I do this because I don't know if this is the way anybody else does it, but it was the way I felt would work best for me. So I'm using this sleeve pattern, and I'm cutting 2 of those, and I'm going to put the sleeves on first onto the doll and then add the shirt part. So I'm going to hem the straight edge, and then I'm going to put glue on the right side of the fabric on either side, and then fold those together to create the sleeve. And what the iron does is it just cures that glue immediately. So there's no waiting, there's no glue coming undone, it just cures it immediately. Then I'm going to flip it inside out and I have a sleeve. And the reason I'm going to put this on him immediately is because I can't figure out how to get a t-shirt on him any other way that isn't just incredibly huge to go over his head, his body, and get his arms in. So I'm going to glue that sleeve directly onto his body. Of course, like I said, I've made 2 of these in the exact same way. And I'm also going to use the iron to just go ahead and cure that glue onto his body. So once I have 2 sleeves, he looks like this. Now I'm going to make the front of the shirt. Oh no, I started with the back of the shirt, and I went through several different patterns, and all I'm doing to make these is just drawing what I think the shape is going to be, putting it onto the doll, and then just adding more area to the pattern wherever I think I need more fabric. So it's just a really painstaking process, but you know, you save fabric that way by going through and making paper patterns first. Now I cut this piece out of that same fabric, and I'm going to use tacky glue to fray check the let's see, I'm fray checking the neck part and then also the sleeve opening. And once I have that glue dried, I'm going to take a Sharpie and just really gently make a thin black line around those areas. I'm not going to try and hem that. I think it would add a lot of bulk. So I just want to make it look like there's a very thin black seam that is holding the shirt together. That's my goal. Now I am going to hem the top of the, I guess that's the part that goes over the shoulders. I'm going to hem that part, and then I'm also going to hem the side seams on either side. So I'm just going to fold those over, add glue, and then immediately cure it with the iron. And then after I have those parts hemmed, I'm going to hem up the bottom so we have a really nicely finished bottom of the shirt. So everything is hemmed except the neck and the arms. So once I have that how I like it and I know that it's going to work, I'm going to add glue right underneath his neck and then also around the shoulders, because I want to start at the top to make sure that I have that fitted correctly before I go to the bottom, because it doesn't really matter where the shirt hits as long as it's, you know, below the pants line. But I just definitely want to make sure I get the top of the shirt correct. Then I'll go around to the sides, add some glue, and then wrap the back of my t-shirt around and then hit it with the iron so that it cures immediately. So here we have the back of his t-shirt. I'm going to basically do the same exact steps to get the front of the t-shirt. I just cut a paper pattern. I fray checked and hemmed it the exact same way. And it was a little bit different shape, so you know, if you try this, just kind of fit it to your doll and see what shape is going to work the best. And then I'm just going to wrap the front of the shirt over the side so that you see one seam. And for some reason my lines didn't quite match up, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I have shirts where the pattern doesn't exactly match in real life, but do make sure that the bottom half of the front of the t-shirt and the back of the t-shirt are the same length. This doll has some shoes that are cast into his molding, but I didn't feel like they were very fitting for Pugsley. I wanted him to have some big black boots, and so I decided to go ahead and make them out of some fabric. And this is a black, leathery, like snakeskin looking fabric, and it doesn't fray, so I thought this would be a good one to try out. So I started by making the shape of the tongues of the boots and gluing those on his foot. Then I made a long strip of rectangular fabric, and I'm going to glue that on the back of his leg, however high up I want the back of the boot. And I'm just going to stick that onto the glue and let that dry pretty well so that it doesn't come off when I try the next part. Then I'm going to add glue to the side of his foot and the top of the tongue where I want the shoe to overlap. Then I'm going to wrap it around his foot and just press the fabric into the glue. After that's done, I realized that the heel had popped up, so I just cut a slit and then pushed that fabric back down. After that's done, I have this weird kind of shape on his foot, and that's just all fabric that's overhanging. So I overlapped on both sides. I only showed you one side of the foot, but I did the same thing on both sides, and then I cut all the extra fabric off of the bottom. Then I can just add some glue onto the bottom of his foot and the bottom edge of the black fabric, and then I added another piece of black fabric to create the sole of the shoe. And that's a pretty simple shoe. And then I did this for both feet. I do decide in the future I want to change the shoe up just a little bit, so I'll show you that after I do a little bit more work on him. But this is how he looks so far. Like I said in the beginning, his face is looking just a little bit too sweet for an Addams. Those freckles are definitely not going to do, so I do need to paint over his face. I did feel like maybe acrylics wasn't the best choice. I'm not quite sure. This is the doll I've had to do the most painting on the face, but in the end I like how it turned out, but I still can see some of the paint strokes, and it just looks very chalky on the face as compared to how it looked before. So I may have to experiment more with that in the future. So for his little face, I decided not to give him like deep dark circles, but just like a darker brown circle, and then I gave him some darker eyebrows. And I really like to add some paint and some shading into the ears, especially for the boys, usually because their hair is short enough that you can see their ears, and when an ear just looks solid, it looks a little bit weird. So I do work on his face a little bit more later on, but this is what I have so far. And if you're thinking, shouldn't you do that before you do the clothes? Yes, probably. I don't know why. I just wanted to jump straight into the clothes this time and thought, shouldn't have done that. If you've seen either of my other doll making videos, you know that it's nice and easy to put them in one of these medicine bottles while you work on the hair so they're not laying flat on the work surface. So that's what I've done here with Pugsley. And I'm getting out some brown viscose. Now, it took me a while to figure out what color I wanted to do his hair. A lot of people who show the Addams family just give everybody black hair, but that's not quite accurate. The original Pugsley in Charles Addams cartoons, I believe, had blonde hair. In the movies, Pugsley had brown hair, and it's hard to tell in the original TV show because it's black and white, but I did find a color picture where it looks like he does have brown hair. And the hairstyle changes quite a bit, but I think Pugsley just kind of ends up having whatever is the popular hairstyle for little boys of that time. And so because the Jimmy Workman Pugsley is around the time when I first started watching the Addams Family, that came out when I was a child, I decided to go for his hairstyle, which has the upturn at the front of his hair. And so that's what I'm going for. They always start out looking very strange when you're doing the wigging, but you have to go in a certain order. And I think right now he looks like George Costanza, just making me laugh. So to make the upturn at the front of his bangs, I had to put this large weft of the viscose and let it dry. I put his hairline, a line of glue at his hairline, and let that dry completely. And then I'm using some watered down glue. Yeah, it's like basically a mixture of glue and water to push the back of the hair down. And then once I'm ready, I lift that front part of the viscose up, straight up, and then use the water glue mixture to brush it in an upwards motion. And when I started cutting it, I started by cutting it way too long because I really didn't want to mess up because it's hard to rip it all off and do it again. So I wanted to go slowly, and so I'm just going to cut slowly until I feel like it is the correct length. So I really like how that turned out. I'm pretty happy with Pugsley's hair. For his shoes, I decided I didn't like the snakeskin look on the outside of the shoe, so I added some wood glue, which always seems to smooth things out, and let that dry, and now they have a little bit of a shine, which I like. And then I also decided to add some shoelaces. So I took some embroidery thread. I just took one strand of the embroidery thread. I dipped it into the water glue mixture and then wrapped it around a toothpick and spun it to make these little loops. And I made 4 of those, so 2 loops for each shoe. And to attach them, I'm just putting a little dab of glue and crisscrossing them on the shoe. And then I'm going to let that dry. Once it's dry, I can trim the laces, and then I just added a little bit of glue to the end of the laces and the loops and pressed it down onto the shoe to make it look like the laces were hanging down due to gravity. I did decide to give his dark circles a little bit more of a touch-up with some chalk pastel, and then I enhanced some of the whiteness in his eyes with some acrylic paint. And then I did dirty up his face a little bit, again with chalk pastel to make it look like he'd been outside playing with explosives like he likes to do. And I also dirtied up his white shirt. No little boy should have a perfectly white shirt. Here he is compared with Uncle Fester for size. Here he is compared with my original Pugsley. I will be keeping the original just for memories, but I do feel like the new one is a little bit of an improvement. Now when it comes to Grandmama, I'm not going to be making her from scratch. I have this Peddler Doll, and I took a class with Sandra Stacy, who is the one who made all these kits, and we made this Peddler Doll. It's the very first doll I made. She's incredibly detailed. She's got an apron, she's got a shawl, she's got a dress, she's got an underdress, she's got pantaloons, shoes, everything, bonnet. She's just a beautiful doll, but I don't have anywhere to put her. She stays in storage because I don't have a project for her. And so I've decided to turn her into Grandmama. And some of you might be upset because you like how she looks now, which I do too, but I think she will have a much longer lasting life and she'd get so much more use in my Addams Family project. So I'm just gonna go for it, and it's killing me to have to pry this bonnet off because I worked so hard to create the bonnet and I felt like it turned out so well. But I will keep the bonnet in case I decide to make another doll in the future that might need one. But man, it was attached. I used a lot of glue to get this lady's hair and bonnet on. But here she is looking a little crazy, which is good, which means we're going in the right direction for Grandmama. I did realize I needed to remove her hair because I don't have any more of that color, and I'm going to have to use a different color completely for her hair. Now, instead of remaking her clothes, because I don't have fabrics that are this detailed, and I'm trying to save some time, which is why I'm putting Grandmama with Pugsley, because this is just really a doll remake rather than a doll make from scratch. I am using some watered down acrylic paint to stain all of her white clothing. And Grandmama usually is shown just in dark colors, and she usually looks like she's just walked out of some kind of fireplace and is just covered in soot. Usually she's been working in the kitchen all day. Her characteristics are usually just, she looks a mess, and she's got huge poof of white grayish hair that's always just a mess. So I feel like I can accomplish this with this doll. I also added some of that dark wash to her dress. I was worried that maybe the dress should have been all black, but looking back at Charles Addams' original cartoons, you do see that he draws Grandmama in a lot of prints, which would have been rather colorful. So I feel okay about putting her in this pattern. And I did want to show you, this is a pretty cool doll. Her head actually moves, which I think is really cool. Grandmama, I think, probably has the most pronounced dark circles on her face, and so I didn't want to hold back really on the dark circles. And I used chalk pastel to darken up the circles around her eyes, and I also put some of the dark chalk pastel into her wrinkles just to define those a little bit more. And then she had these really nice, beautifully arched brown eyebrows. So to make those a little crazier, I whited those out and then put some gray eyebrows on top. And so, and then I also gave her gray lips. I just wanted to make her face kind of as gray as possible. I realized I don't have any white or gray viscose. I do, however, have this like bleach blonde mohair, and I've never worked with mohair before, but my goodness, that stuff is tough to work with. I decided to go with Grandmama's hairstyle that is worn by Carol Kane when she plays Grandmama. I was a little worried about just putting this crazy mop of hair on the doll's head and it being a little bit out of control. So when I saw this photograph with the braids, I thought, great, it still looks like a crazy mop of hair, but it's a little bit controlled. So here I'm creating braids. I just separated into 3 parts, braided it, and then I added a little loop of embroidery thread at the bottom to hold it. In order to get them on her head, I just used a little bit of tacky glue and put the braids so that they hung as far as I wanted them down, and then clipped off the tops of the braids, whatever was extra hanging off the back, and then added a little bit more glue to make sure they were attached to her head. And then I also attached the braids loosely to her clothing so that they would stay in place and not just fly all over the place. Now you might say this looks a little bit too blonde, a little bit too light. I am going to be adding some shading to it later with chalk pastel. A lot of Grandmama's pictures, she has a very pronounced part, and so I wanted to make sure I still had that part going on. So I'm just going to do part of her head at a time, half of her head at a time, and that's going to create the part that I'm looking for. And it was about this time that I realized that super glue works a lot better with mohair. The viscose will dry almost immediately with tacky glue, but the mohair, it doesn't want to dry at all and it takes forever. So the first thing I did was flip the bottom of that piece up and attach it to the back of her head, and then I flipped the front piece to the back, creating this kind of loopy, loose look on both sides of her head. I did the same thing on both sides. So the back of her head, you can kind of see where I glued those pieces down. So I decided to add a bun to the back of her hair, and because she's usually portrayed with having some crazy hair or just like lots of hair, I thought she'd probably need a bun for whatever was left and not in her braids. So I took a loop of mohair and I glued both ends of the mohair to the back of her head, and I just started twisting it until I got a bun shape that I liked. Then I just took some Gorilla Glue, the Gorilla Super Glue. It doesn't have to be Gorilla Glue, but super glue, some kind of gel super glue, and glued that down. So I think it gave her a really nice big head of hair, which is one of her characteristics in any of her portrayals. So I thought, I think I achieved that at least. Now I'm taking some chalk pastel and a brush, and I just want to create this grayish look for her hair. So you can see one side versus the other. I think it really helps tone down the blonde, and as you can see I added more and more, and it ended up being almost a little bit blackish, but I think I really needed it to get it that much so that overwhelmed the blonde. So here we go. Here are our family members so far. We started with Uncle Fester, who had no hair, which was great. And then we went on to Lurch, and then of course Pugsley, whose outfit was pretty simple, so that was nice. And then I just rehabbed my peddler lady into Grandmama, which was super duper fun. So we're only missing 3 family members, which is crazy because I felt like making dolls for this project was such a daunting task, and now I'm all of a sudden past the halfway mark. We only have 3 members left to make. Probably next will be Gomez next time I make a doll, and then Morticia and Wednesday. I'm guessing that's probably going to be the order that I go in, but yeah, I'm excited to see how they turn out. I did take a picture of my current family members together, and it just looks so weird without those 3 family members, so I'm excited to get them all done and all together. It's also been really fun to get them in the house. I think it brings a whole different element to my miniature projects. I used to be so anti-doll, and now I think I'm hooked. Let me know in the comments, do you like dolls in your projects? Or are you more of a no doll person? I think it's a really interesting aspect to miniatures because people usually have a pretty strong opinion about that. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!